Hi. Official recaps here.
It's 1944, World War II. Somewhere on the South Pacific, two planes fall on an island, followed closely by their parachuting pilots, American soldier Hank Marlowe and Japanese soldier Gunpei Akari. The moment they lay eyes on one another, they start shooting and running, leading them from the beach into the jungle where they are pursued. When Hank comes to a cliff's edge, he is forced to stop, giving Gunpei the perfect opportunity to attack him with his sword. Hank disarms Gunpei by pushing him aside and stopping the sword with his bare hands. However, Gunpei grabs a knife and lunges towards Hank, cutting him just inches from the throat when, out of nowhere, a massive gorilla head with a roar at the soldiers and a giant hairy hand emerge over the edge of the cliff. A cab is parked in front of the White House when we next cut to Washington. Bill Randa, the leader of the U.S. government agency Monarch, and Dr. Houston Brooks, a geologist, emerge from it. Brooks questions whether seeing Senator Willis is a good idea given the timing, but Randa reassures him that they are broke and that this is their last opportunity. Even though he is a little skeptical, the senator welcomes them to their office, and the men quickly explain that they have found Skull Island, an undiscovered island in the South Pacific that is mentioned in legends as the place where God did not finish creation and is infamous for all the ships and planes that have gone missing. According to Randa, there may have been an imaginable ecosystem present during the 1954 nuclear tests, which weren't really tests but rather an attempt to destroy something. The senator still believes this to be a fairy tale, so he leaves his office. However, Randa and Brooks don't give up and follow him, giving them more justifications. A mission is about to start nearby, so they could capitalize on it. Additionally, there are numerous items they might find on the island. Brooks isn't sure what those items could be, but they can't let the Russians discover them first. The senator is persuaded by that and informs them that this will be his final favor for them. They'll require a military escort, Randa continues. The next scene shows us an American airbase in Vietnam, where all of the soldiers are preparing to return home now that the war is ended. Officers Glenn Mills, Earl Cole, Reg Slivko, Reilly's, and their Lieutenant Colonel Preston Packard are introduced to us at this point. When Packard returns to his office after drinking, Major Jack Chapman checks on him. Packard believes all of Chapman's accomplishments have been in vain, even though it appears he already has a job in the works. Later, as dusk approaches, Packard gets a call inviting him to join Randa on her mission, which he gladly accepts. Brooks and Randa are on their way to a bar in Saigon to recruit a former Special Air Service captain to work as their tracker. They discover James Conrad, a man, playing pool inside the bar and winning money. In an instant, the trio is seated around a table attempting to come to an agreement. Conrad demands 5 times the money they are offering in addition to a bonus if they survive this dangerous expedition. They consent. Conrad asks to know precisely what they're tracking, but all Brooks and Randa say is that they need his experience venturing into hazardous areas. The next scene shows photojournalist Mason Weaver working in her dimly lit workspace. She is thrilled to hear from Randa that she has been accepted into her expedition when she gets a call. All of the characters are gathering in Bangkok a few days later in order to board the boat. Having been eager to get home when the war ended, the soldiers are not happy about their new assignment. Weaver first introduces herself to NASA employee Steve Woodward before meeting Packard, who is not fond of her reporting on the war. When the ship eventually sets sail and all of the explorers are on board, they all gather to hear a speech given by Victor Nieves, another NASA official. He says the island's ability to remain hidden from the outside world is due to the constant storm system that envelops it. But with Packard's Army helicopters, they ought to be able to survive. Along with San Lin, the third scientist on their team, he also introduces Brooks and Randa. Then Brooks takes over the explanation, stating that they will map the island using vibrations caused by explosives. Then it's Chapman's turn. He tells them that all radio contact will be cut off due to the storm's interference, leaving them alone. 3 days later, he will meet them at the island's north end. That is the only safe window for leaving for an undisclosed amount of time, so don't miss it. Conrad and Weaver discover one another while exploring the boat after everyone has been dismissed. They both question the rationales offered to them for this expedition and make fun of one another's justifications for going as well. They arrive at the island quickly, and the storm appears much more vicious up close. Nieves opposes crossing it, but Randa does. They let Packard make the final decision. He chooses to go in. A fleet of helicopters, comprising all the soldiers and the civilian teams, take off and initially fly off without incident. However, things get tricky as soon as they get into the storm. There is constant lighting to avoid, and the helicopters are always shaking. However, Packard is seasoned and maintains his composure, leading his fleet with a speech about Icarus until they arrive safely. The island is truly breathtaking, but there isn't much time to take it all in as the plan is about to get underway. After Weaver, Randa, and Conrad are the only civilians left on land, the helicopters take off in search of the designated location where the bombs will be dropped. The rapid detection of explosion vibrations by radars confirms Brooks's theory that the bedrock is essentially hollow. Everything is going according to plan when all of a sudden one of the helicopters gets hit by a flying tree and is brought down, and another gets hit and grabbed by a massive hand. The soldier sees the large face of an ape before the helicopter is flipped around and it swallows him whole. When everyone looks up and sees Kong, the enormous gorilla, standing against the horizon, all the alarms go off. He merely roars at them while standing there at first, but as soon as the soldiers start firing at him, he doesn't think twice about defending himself. Since he isn't seriously injured by the bullets, Kong can easily move among the helicopters and bring them down. He even smashes some soldiers who manage to land safely. Kong takes down each helicopter one by one, and he doesn't stop until not a single one is still in the air. The attack caused all of the expedition's members to become dispersed. Weaver, Nieves, Slivko, Brooks, San Lin, and Conrad are gathered at one location, and they will lead them northward to get as close as possible to the meeting spot. Even though Chapman is by himself in another location, he still sends Packard his position before the line breaks. Packard is on yet another spot together with Reilly's, and when they start moving, they quickly find Cole, Mills, Woodward and a couple more soldiers. Turns out Rhonda is also nearby, so Packard goes to speak to him in private. He points his gun at him and asks for the real reason behind this expedition, so Rhonda explains, monsters exist, and nobody ever believed him. The bombs weren't dropped for geology, they were dropped to shake something out. Many years ago, Rhonda was in a ship that got attacked by a monster. He survived, but the government told his family the ship had sunk in battle, and the public never heard about it. Rhonda's never stopped believing, and now he wants to destroy these beasts before they destroy humanity. He asks Packard to take them home with proof so they can send the cavalry. Packard replies he is the cavalry. Back to Conrad's group, Slivko tries to contact the others to no avail. When they walk by a lake, they encounter a huge bison-like animal that Slivko points his gun at, but Conrad makes him put it down, since the animal isn't attacking them. After staring at them for a moment, the creature turns around and leaves. Meanwhile, Packard and his soldiers are searching for Chapman and the special weapons. As they make their way through the jungle, one of their soldiers is suddenly killed by a large stick in his throat. When they look up, they realize that stick is the leg of a giant spider. The spider manages to capture Mills despite the team's instantaneous firing at it. They can no longer shoot because a friend is in the way, so they begin chopping the legs while Mills pulls out a knife and begins to chop the parts that are grabbing him. It takes some work, but he manages to pull it off, and as soon as he hits the ground, the team fires once more, taking out the spider. Conrad's team discovers some abandoned ruins in the interim. They enter the building and are immediately encircled by natives brandishing weapons at them. They point their guns back, but any potential fight is prevented just in time by a man appearing among the natives. It's Hank, the pilot that landed here during World War II. The Indians retreat when he assures them that everything is okay, and Hank leads the group into the ruins. Coming full circle, Chapman is restocking his canteen when he notices Kong showing up. After hiding behind a rock, Chapman observes the ape as it drinks water before, quite unexpectedly, reaching into the river and grabbing a massive octopus. When the beast tries to squeeze Kong with its tentacles, Kong rips off and devours his limbs. He drags the remaining octopus behind him as he departs. Hank tells the group that as long as they stay with the locals in the village, they will be safe. They are surrounded by a massive wall, but the other monsters are the ones who need the wall, not Kong. Hank shows them some ancient paintings on the rocks, inside an old shipwreck that he takes them to. They portray the beliefs of the locals, who for thousands of years lived in constant fear of the monsters until, all of a sudden, some of those same creatures began to defend them. Kong won't attack unless provoked because he is revered by the locals as their god and king. The other monster that killed Gunpei was the Skullcrawler, a large subterranean lizard that was awakened by the bombs, not Kong. Kong can usually handle them just fine, but the largest one, the one that killed Kong's family, is dangerous. Conrad brings up the team that will be rescuing them in 3 days, but Hank responds that it isn't feasible to get to the north end of the island in that amount of time, at least, not by foot. A group of peculiar birds is spotted by Packard's team as they are traversing a swamp in the meantime. Even though they don't attack, Packard shoots one of them, frightening the others away. Cole urges the soldiers to put their trust in Packard as they start to become anxious and doubt if they will arrive in time. Returning to Conrad and company, Hank informs them that he and Gunpei had begun construction on a boat prior to Gunpei's passing. In order to get to the rescue team in time, the team will now assist him in finishing it. Weaver engages with the locals and takes pictures of them while everyone works on the repairs. She goes to investigate when she hears a noise coming from the other side of the wall and discovers that one of those bison-like animals has become trapped beneath an aircraft. Despite her best efforts, she is unable to lift the entire plane by herself. Fortunately, Kong shows up and takes it up for her. He looks at her for a few seconds and then walks away, as if he were endorsing what she's done. While trekking to locate Chapman, Packard's group discovers the bloodstained Kong left behind on a mountain. They now understand that the creature is capable of harm or even death. Chapman tries to use the radio to communicate with Conrad's team while they are working on the boat, but it is ineffective. As he rests on the large trunk, it moves and reveals that it is not a fallen tree but rather an object that resembles one. When Chapman fires at it, it gets scared away but also attracts the attention of another monster. He barely has time to turn around before a skullcrawler eats him. It gets dark. Conrad and Weaver watch the northern lights in the village while other people chat. When her flashlight breaks while she's trying to take a picture, Conrad gives her his lighter, a gift from his father, a World War II soldier. His hero was him. As his team makes camp in the jungle, Randy tells Packard that this plan is stupid. Packard replies that if he is dissatisfied with the way he manages things, he is free to depart. The next morning, the boat is ready to go. Hank retrieves the sword from Gunpei's grave and carries it with him because during their time together, Gunpei had developed into his brother. After putting in extra effort to get the boat started, everyone gets on board and they eventually set sail. They got a call from Packard's team as Hank was telling them about his family back home. They are asked to shoot a signal so they can find their location, and Packard does so. When one of those strange birds flies by and takes Nieves to eat with its flock, the celebration is ruined even though all they can do is keep going. They land the boat and disembark a few hours later in order to meet up with Packard and his group. Now that everyone is back together, Packard says he still wants to find Chapman and Conrad wants them to board the ship and depart quickly. Hank objects to the plan because traveling west entails visiting the Skullcrawler's home. However, since tracking is his responsibility, Conrad ultimately caves on the condition that they return by dusk. The group departs in search of Chapman and on the way, they find the skeletons of Kong's parents. Despite Hank's complaints, Packard orders them to cross the mass grave, which is covered in a weird mist, a mist they discover is flammable when Cole drops his cigarette and causes an explosion. When a skullcrawler spots them, they don't have to go far before running for cover behind those enormous bones. The skullcrawler pauses to spew out a skull, which lands close to Conrad and allows him to see that it bears Chapman's name tag. Afterward, it appears to turn around and disappear. The team believes it is safe to exit, but the skullcrawler attacks and devours Rhonda when his camera flash goes off. Everyone fires, but because the lizard is hiding in the mist, it is difficult to aim. It appears out of nowhere in front of Hank, but he cuts it down with the sword before it shoves him aside and devours one of the soldiers. It then moves on to Weaver, at which point a different soldier uses his flamethrower to stop it. The soldier is struck by the skullcrawler's tail, which launches it into the air and explodes again where it lands. That explosion hits and knocks Slivko unconscious, landing him close to the gas cans. Conrad grabs Hank's sword and a gas mask that was on the ground and puts them on in order to enter the area where gas is leaking while the soldiers shoot the strange birds that appeared out of nowhere earlier. He kills every bird in his path until he reaches Slivko, but the skullcrawler has already reached them. Fortunately, Weaver shows up in time to launch Conrad's lighter at the creature, causing it to erupt. After they depart the mass grave, Conrad tells everyone that Chapman is dead and provides evidence of this by displaying the name tag the creature had puked out. Hank tells Packard what a terrible idea this is. Despite everything, Packard is determined to get to the crash site and get the explosives so he can kill Kong. Weaver, Hank, Conrad, and the scientists attempt to stop him, saying that Kong is good and had only been defending himself, but Packard won't listen. It appears like a fight is going to break out as everyone draws their weapons, but Conrad steps in to mediate. He gives Packard the location he and his soldier need, but he will take the civilians back to the boat while Woodward leaves with the soldiers. While traveling, they come across Chapman's belongings and take them back to his family. Weaver follows Conrad as he tells his group to hold off while he searches for high ground. It's nighttime by the time Packard's party finds the weapons and begins working on a trap for Kong that includes flames. We cut back to Conrad and Weaver then, who make it to the edge of a cliff and manage to take a good look at the river and where the boat could possibly be. It's at that moment that Kong visits them, but he doesn't attack because he recognizes Weaver, who now feels brave enough to touch his nose. Kong doesn't seem to mind, but he roars and leaves when he hears the explosion set off by the soldiers. Conrad and Weaver return to their team and send them back to the boat. The scientists do as asked, but Hank joins them when he learns they want to save Kong. Meanwhile, Kong has reached the soldiers and is ready to fight. He runs to them on the water, but Packard throws a torch and starts a ring of fire around the ape. At first it seems Kong is in so much pain that he's unable to move, but eventually he makes it through the flames and smashes Woodward with his hand before falling to the ground. After witnessing Kong's suffering, Packard orders his soldiers to lay down their charges, but we can see hesitation in their eyes. Conrad shows up to stop them, along with Weaver and Hank, as they all grab the detonators. The group appears to be at a standstill as soldiers and civilians point their weapons at one another and Packard rants about a soldier's dirty work that is, until Slivko intervenes and points at Packard. Conrad says it's over, but before he can finish speaking, there's a noise in the water, the largest skullcrawler. With the exception of Packard, who stays behind to activate the detonator in an attempt to kill Kong but is ultimately crushed by him upon awakening, everyone flees. Kong engages the lizard in battle but is soon overpowered. The sun rises as the group makes it to the edge of the island. They send Weaver to fire a flare that Brooks could see while they work on a distraction to buy them some time. The Skullcrawler starts chasing Conrad and the soldiers as they run. Cole chooses to stay behind and offer himself as a sacrifice, planning to detonate his explosives when the lizard gets close enough, but the lizard pushes him away with its tail. When Kong reappears, he starts punching and smashing the lizard as many times as he can while Weaver climbs to a high spot and fires that flare, just as the Skullcrawler is about to get the rest of the team. Kong gets knocked back by the Skullcrawler after taking a few more blows, one of which involves a tree, and unintentionally stumbles onto some chains that bind him. The scientists arrive with the boat, firing their weapons at the Skullcrawler as the soldiers board, just as the lizard is about to kill him. With the help of a flare that Weaver fires at the creature's neck, they are able to divert its attention for long enough for Kong to break free from his chains and use one of the flares to attack the Skullcrawler. Kong then grabs the flare and smashes it against the mountain, sending Weaver falling into the water. When Kong spots her, he rushes to give the lizard a few strikes before diving into the water to save Weaver. The Skullcrawler reappears, jumps on Kong, and uses his tongue to grab his wrist as he removes her. Kong seizes the opportunity to rip out the Skullcrawler's guts and kill it by grabbing its tongue. Weaver seems fine when he opens his hand, so he gently places her on the ground before Conrad arrives to see how she's doing. They watch together as Kong gives them one final glance before heading out. Everyone is on the boat and sailing to the meeting spot a few moments later. Though they swear they won't say anything, they're concerned that once word gets out, the place will change, before a fleet of helicopters arrives to save them. Kong roars for the camera one last time.
If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.